Hello, I'm T. Chase. Welcome to Ask a Pastor, where each week we take questions that you've sent to us and we try to answer them from a pastoral Christian perspective. It probably won't surprise you to know that recently most of the questions that we've been getting have something to do with coronavirus and the effect that it's had on us and our society and just the world that we live in. And so in the coming weeks, most of the questions that we will answer will have something to do with this, although we may throw in another odd question here or there. Today, we're going to look at the question of what our response should be to people who are grieving because of the death of someone dear to them. And of course, this is not something that would be exclusive to coronavirus, but I think it's on more people's mind much more often now, because many more of us know people who have died recently or are worried that someone that we care very much for will die. Before we dive into that though, I do need to address an issue, a limitation that this series has. And that is, even though it's called Ask a Pastor, it's not really possible for me to respond to these questions pastorally. What I mean is this, that if I or any of the other leaders respond, if we do it well, then our answer is going to be intelligent. It's going to make intellectual sense. And it's also going to be biblically sound. It'll be based on what we know about God from the Bible. But there is no way in communicating over YouTube that I or any of the other pastors can meet your emotional needs. That can only be done with real pastoral care. And pastoral care cannot happen over the internet this way. That it needs to happen personally, with personal conversations with someone that you trust, someone that you are comfortable with. And although listening to me is no substitute at all for real pastoral care, our hope is that in doing these videos, that we can provide you with the tools that you might need to be able to provide pastoral care, better pastoral care to those people in your life who might need it right now. Now, a fortnight ago, I addressed the question of why a loving God would allow something like coronavirus to happen. And one of the points that I made, which is true, is that there have been other pandemics before this one. I specifically mentioned the Spanish flu and the Black Plague, the Black Death, as being far more deadly, far more horrible than it looks like COVID-19 will be to us. But one of you pointed out, very rightly, that just knowing that there have been worse plagues in the past doesn't do anything to help someone who is grieving the loss right now of someone that they loved very much. And that's a lot of people. But so far, and it's the 18th of May, 2020, so far, there have been 35,000 people in the United Kingdom who have died. There are over 300,000 people worldwide that we know of who have died to COVID-19. So most of you probably know someone already who has died. And if you personally do not, you almost definitely have someone in your life who has lost someone very dear to them. So you may be asking yourself, well, why did my loved one have to die? Or other people may be asking you that very same question, why did my loved one have to die? And these are questions that really need to be handled personally and pastorally. So please, don't just listen to my words now and hope that that's going to do the job. Seek out real pastoral care if that is something that you need in your life right now. Help those in your life who need that to find it if you're not able to provide it. Of course, You're welcome to contact us if you would like to talk with someone at St. Mark's or St. John's. But if you do not live in or near Great Clacton, you might want to look for someone closer to home that you could connect with, someone that you could continue to build a relationship with after we've passed this time of isolation and lockdown. So as Christians, how do we respond to someone grieving over the loss of a loved one? Well, as Christians, our role model in everything is Jesus Christ. So what we're going to do with the rest of our time is to look at a specific example in Jesus' life when he had to deal with this sort of situation. So we're going to look in the Gospel of John in the chapter 11, which is about the death of his friend Lazarus. Now, if you have not read John 11 recently, I would encourage you to read it, not now, when we're done, because we're only going to be looking at a few verses here and there, but it's well worth reading the whole thing to get it all in context. Now, one of the most amazing things that we as Christians believe about Jesus is that he is both fully God and at the same time fully human. Now, how that is even possible is a completely different discussion, but this is something that the entire church around the world have believed for 2,000 years, that we have held as one of the core parts of our faith. And so what we're going to do is next week, we're going to come back to John 11 again, and we'll see how Jesus as God responded to his friend Lazarus dying. But this evening, we are only going to look at how Jesus as a human responded to his friend dying. And there's a reason that I want to limit the scope this evening to Jesus' human response to his friend's death. And those reasons are, on the one hand, because we are only human. Because of that, we cannot look at Jesus' godly actions as a model for what we should do here and now, but we can look at his human actions and use those as a model for what we can do here and now in comforting those who have lost someone. But the second reason that I only want to look at his human response this evening is because some of you listening to me might not actually believe that Jesus is God. And if you might just think that he was a man, just maybe a very good man, but don't believe that he was divine, that there's anything supernatural about him. And if that's you, what I want to show you tonight is that even if Jesus was not divine at all, that he still gives us the best example, he's still the best role model for how we can respond lovingly to those in need around us. So I'm going to read from John 11 now, and we're going to see 3 ways that Jesus set an example for how we can help people in their time of grief. But first, I just want to set the scene a little bit. There was this family who lived in Bethany. It was a village of Bethany. It was just about 2 miles from the big city of Jerusalem, where the temple was. And there was, in this family, Lazarus, the brother, and 2 sisters, Martha and Mary. And these 3 people were very important to Jesus. Now, they were friends of his, but even more than that. Now, I hope you know that Jesus loves everyone. He died for everyone. He sacrificed himself for everyone because he loves every single last one of us. That's absolutely true. But interestingly, in all 4 Gospels and all 4 accounts of Jesus' life, there are only 3 people who are specifically identified as being people that Jesus loved. We can see that right here in John 11:5. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So there was something special about the relationship that Jesus had with this family, that they were identified as being especially loved by Jesus. And so when Lazarus fell ill and his sisters were worried that he might die, they sent to Jesus. He was far away, but they sent to him and they said, please come quickly, because they knew that Jesus had the power to heal. And they thought, if he only comes in time, our brother will not die. So when Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? So the first thing we see is that Jesus was willing to put himself at risk to be with those who needed him. The last time Jesus had been in Jerusalem, he had made some of the religious leaders very, very, very angry. So angry, in fact, that they were going to stone him. They were going to take massive stones and pick them up to hurl at him until he was dead. And the reason they wanted to do that is because Jesus had said that he and God the Father were one. And that was blasphemy to the Jewish leaders. And they wanted him dead, and they weren't likely to forget that. And so when Jesus said, well, we're going back to Jerusalem because Mary and Martha and Lazarus need me, the disciples thought he was crazy, because he was going right back towards the people that were going to kill him, that wanted to kill him. And yet he went, because Jesus cared more for the people in his life than for his own safety. Now, I am not suggesting that any of you go out and put yourself in harm's way right now. That's not what I'm doing. There have been people in the past who have suffered and sometimes died for their faith, acting out their faith, sharing their faith. But God doesn't call most of us to do that. In fact, for most of us, I think what he calls us to do is just as hard, but very different. That God does not call most of us to give up our lives for him. That is, he doesn't call most of us to die for him. But he calls us instead to give our lives to him, to live for him. In fact, the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, in chapter 1, verse 21, he told them that for me, to live is Christ. What he meant is that as long as he keeps living, he is going to be doing Jesus' will. He's going to do everything that he can to serve Jesus. And that's really what Jesus wants from all of us who say that we serve him, that we live for him. And so when we think about how we could be like Jesus, in this case, it's not find a way to put yourself in danger, but actually, how can you find a way to put aside your own comfort for the benefit of someone else? Because there's plenty of reasons why all of us might decide not to engage with someone who's grieving. It's time consuming. It is emotionally draining. It can make us really uncomfortable. We don't know what to say or how to act. Or we might even just think that we're inadequate. We don't see how we could actually be of any help. And all of these things might be true. But keep in mind that when Jesus' friends needed him, he went traveling many days on foot towards people who wanted to kill him so that he could be where he was needed most. And if Jesus could do that, then those of us who follow him, at the very least, can step outside of our comfort zone a little bit. We can put aside time that we might have wanted to spend on ourselves in order to give that to someone else who needs us. We can endure the emotional drain of being with someone who's grieving. Or maybe we just hand our inadequacy over to God and let him use that inadequacy to be a comfort to those who really need us. Reading on. Now when Jesus came to Bethany, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and she met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Now, Mary and Martha are two very different people. As we read about them in different parts of the Gospels, responding in different ways to situations, we see that they're two very different people. Now here, when Martha hears that Jesus has come, she goes running out to him immediately, and then she starts talking to him about theology, while Mary stays in her home and waits for Jesus to call her to him. And then when she does come to him, she throws herself at his feet and weeps and wails. They both had different needs at this time of grief, and Jesus was willing to meet them where their needs were. So with Martha, Martha just wanted to talk. Straight away, she wanted to talk about and process what she was dealing with theologically. And so Jesus engaged with her. Mary, for whatever reason, wasn't ready to see him. And so rather than imposing himself on her, he waited. And he let her know that he was available. And then when she was ready, she came to him and he interacted with her. Because when she wept, he allowed her to weep and mourn, and he mourned along with her. Just like Jesus did, we can respond best to others' grief by being what they need us to be when they need it. And this is obviously going to be different from person to person. And in fact, when we go to meet with someone who is grieving, or even just to have a talk with them on the phone or over the computer, we may find that that person is responding very differently to how we expected. Because it's really, most people don't know how they're going to respond in times of stress or grief. And so we're not going to know either. So rather than meeting someone with an expectation of what you need to do or say, or what that person is going to need of you, to be aware in the moment of what it is that they really need, and to try to provide that and to be that for that person. Reading on. When Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Jesus responds to this sorrow and this grief with mourning of his own. But the word that's used here to talk about Jesus weeping, it's a tearful word. It's a word that's usually used to describe tears flowing. That this was not being a little sad or a little teardrop falling. This is deep emotion that Jesus was feeling. Now, you have to remember that Jesus knows that Lazarus is not going to stay dead. He knows that he's going to be resurrected. So Jesus knows how the story ends already, and yet he's still weeping. Because Jesus feels the pain and the sorrow of those around him. The word passion means to suffer, means suffering. We see this when we talk about the time just before Jesus' crucifixion and his death on the cross. We refer to that as his passion. And so the word compassion means to suffer with someone else. And so when we show compassion to someone else, we're willing to make that person's suffering our own. And that is exactly what Jesus is doing here. Really feeling the pain of those who are weeping and mourning. And so I would say that would be the third thing that we can learn from Jesus, to not be afraid to grieve with people, to not feel that we have to be stoic and strong for another person, but we can feel that person's emotion, let it in, let it really affect us. Because ultimately, the most pastoral thing that any one of us can do is to engage honestly with another person's grief. To let that person know that he or she is not alone. And I hope these 3 examples from the life of Jesus will be a good start to helping you to know how you might engage honestly, emotionally with the people who might need you. First, to be willing to put your own comfort aside. Think about what they need, not what you might prefer for yourself. Second, to be aware that people are going to have different needs in their grief, and to be willing to be what each of those people need as and when they need it. And then the third, to be willing to suffer with, to have compassion on, to embrace the grief of the person that you're with. There's much more to say about the story, and we'll look at it next week some more. I would encourage you, between now and then, to read John 11. If you do not have access to a Bible, I will put a link in the description so you can easily pull that up online. And of course, if you have any other questions that you would like us to answer in one of the weeks coming up, then I would encourage you to send us an email at the email address that's listed here. Thank you again for joining me, and I hope you have a blessed week.